All right, hello and welcome to another Expert Insight interview. My name is John Golem from SalesPOP, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from San Diego. And today I'm joined by Zach Moreno and Rock Felder, who are just up the coast a little bit in Oakland, California. How you doing, guys?
Hey, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Zach and Rock are from Squadcast. And maybe because we're going to talk about podcasting and entrepreneurship and how podcasting can really help businesses. But maybe we just start off and baseline this. Maybe tell us about Squadcast, why you established Squadcast and what you do.
Yeah, happy to. So we have the privilege of working with content creators and podcasters that are unable to record in the same location with each other, and we help them sound great. So it's basically a software solution that you can connect with your guest or co-host anywhere in the world, record studio quality audio, and keep your production on schedule, no matter people travel or whatever happens in the day-to-day of not being able to be in the same physical studio. So we focus on quality and reliability and really just removing barriers and building bridges to meaningful conversations.
Excellent. And tell me, in your view, why has podcasting become such an important part of what businesses do? Because I mean, nowadays it's, you had people used to have blogs and all of that, but a lot more people are getting into podcasting now. And I don't think everybody understands the power of podcasting or even why they should even sort of flirt with this.
Yeah, it's just there's a unique way that you can connect and interact with your audience. And it's just a great way to kind of build influence within your industry. Or you typically in podcasting, there's no gatekeepers. So you have a lot of control over your content. So I think that independence that comes with it as well is super valuable. So you get to have this really intimate connection with your audience, but then also it's kind of, you do it your way. So if you want to change something up or whatever, like you have that opportunity as well. So I think it's a lot of freedom and independence, along with connecting to an audience that is like really desiring exactly what you have to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing is about the audience, because I think we hear a lot of stuff talked about companies becoming more human and people wanting human connection and all of this, and technology to some degree for a while was pushing that away and creating barriers. But now we're seeing technology like the one that you have is actually enabling more human connection as opposed to putting up barriers. It's actually pushing the human back front and center.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's a really, really great position to be in to help people express their creativity, and for brands and companies and creatives to really tell those stories to their audience or their customers, even if they're the same. That's even a win-win.
Yeah.
And for us, we kind of stumbled upon this problem ourselves. We were trying to create a science fiction podcast with a team that's remote, and we ran into these struggles of quality, reliability, and worst of all, it just wasn't fun, which it should be fun. Podcasting is like the funnest thing you can do if you're getting it right. But when we took a step back and saw what the rest of the creators in the industry were doing, we realized that there was no industry standard for when you wanted to record a podcast remotely. And so we saw it as our opportunity to build exactly that piece of software for the industry to become the industry standard. So that's exactly what we're doing with Squadcast.
Yeah, no, which is great, and I think because of the solution that you're bringing to the issue that I think a lot of people struggle with when the whole content marketing thing really kind of came to the fore, and that is companies really struggle with creating good content. And as we have seen over the last while, what happened is we got lots of bad content, and it was just content for content's sake pushing out there. I think now with media like podcasting is, number one, not everybody is great at writing and creating stuff, but there's a lot of people are pretty good at talking. And once you get used to the medium itself, the level of content, as you say, that can come up from be created out of conversations is such a higher level.
Absolutely. It's also cool that you can use the content created from a podcast to repurpose into a blog and stuff like that, but it doesn't necessarily always work the other way.
Yeah, no, it often doesn't work the other way. So as you have established your business, what has surprised you about the kind of people who've been coming to you looking for your services?
We've learned a lot of really unique things about how podcasters create their content. And we really just focus on being great listeners and getting out of the way and building, tools for creators to really innovate and keep their audience, happy and listening. So I think that that's really where a lot of our innovations have come from is to empower that, to be reliable. And then also the beautiful thing is that we kind of sit at the intersection of podcasting, which is growing and a really ripe space for innovation within technology, for the connection element that you mentioned, for the brand and marketing opportunities that exist therein. But then also, we sit at the other intersection. There is remote work,
Mhm.
and being a distributed team for the last 4 years, we have learned a lot about that. But then also the creators that we're helping record in over 120 countries over a year every month, it's just an amazing amount that we've learned from what keeps podcasters happy, what keeps their audience engaged and listening. Really, the Rock mentioned intimacy, but if you're not really focusing on the quality, the intimacy doesn't quite come for free. Or if it's your guest, the credibility of that influencer really can be harmed by low quality content. So that's really where we focus on those two pieces of remote, but then also podcast and on the production side.
And to
Yeah,
piggyback on that,
go
sorry,
ahead.
but what I found most surprising is how podcasting's been around for over 10 years now. But
Sure.
but like I said, there's like lack of industry standards. Everyone's still
Mhm.
kind of figuring it out. You hear the term Wild West thrown around. I think it's overused, but it kind of is that vibe. And what was surprising to us was how when we first entered the space, the conversation around the importance of quality when it comes to your content was kind of a debated topic. And a lot of people didn't think that it was really necessary to have quality, but we always felt like quality is something that you can control, that's going to separate you from the rest of the shows in your category. So why would you not take advantage of that? And so luckily, fortunately, I would say, for us and for the industry, that conversation is definitely changing now. People are seeing the importance of quality. I think a lot of it's driven by the listeners' expectations and appetites are also changing. So it's an exciting time in podcasting, but that was something that was a little surprising to us.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I want to pick up on that because I think that's, as I said earlier, I think that's the same thing that happened originally with written content. Was, at the beginning it was there was a lot of thought and effort put into good, solid content. Then it just became content for content's sake, and a lot of stuff was thrown out there.
Exactly.
I think the same thing happened with, as you know, has happened with video, and certainly with podcasting. And it's interesting because I've been doing this for a while. You've been doing this for a while. But during the pandemic, like a lot of people have thought, okay, I need to start a podcast, in order to help my business. And I think it looks a lot easier than it is. And I think that's probably something that you've also experienced, that it looks like it's pretty simple. The technology is relatively simple. People like you have provided, obviously great services, but it's not that easy.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, it can be fairly simple. To top it off, like I love the podcasting community, but there is some misinformation about how complex it needs to be. And because, like Rock said, there's no gatekeepers and it is early days, there's not necessarily it's kind of a blank canvas. When you want to start your show, you can put the pieces together to do that, but it's not like video where you have YouTube and just kind of adhere to the standards that they want you to put those videos up there. You have comments and engagements and monetization baked in. All of those things exist within podcasting, but you got to kind of choose your weapon and put it together. And that can seem on day one to be very complex. Like you have a lot of choices, like microphone and these wires and these
Mm,
boxes and all that stuff, but it doesn't really need to be much more complex than picking up audio from a conversation and publishing that online. I think at the core of it, that's all we're really doing. And where it gets more complex is like you probably want a website so you can grow your email list. You probably want to have a media host, so that way when your show gets really popular, you can get the analytics and tell your employer, like, hey, our podcast for our brand is growing and we're getting this many listeners, and we can track that back to this much revenue. That's really where you start to have to wire some stuff up. But I think that if you focus on the basics of having content is king, right? But with quality content, I think all things equal, it's very difficult to kind of mail it in for a podcast interview. I think it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to mail it in for like a blog post or something like that, which you could draft over a couple weeks time with a couple different authors. But a podcast, like, we actually have to have this conversation, listen to each other, have empathy, and respond creatively, right? It's all
There's
kind of
performance.
there's a performance, like an improv nature is kind of how I think about it. We don't quite know where this conversation is going to take us. We have a rough idea, but I think that that's where the element of fun that Rock mentioned comes into it.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur with that, and I think if you're going to do it, I think you have to ask yourself, are you able to flex like that? Because sure, there is a room for those podcasts and interviews where you have a set of questions and you ask the questions, the person has the question in advance, and that's fine.
Right.
However, I think the essence, for me personally, the essence of podcasting is exactly what you just outlined there, Zach. It's that kind of improv. It's that where is it going? It's that free flow, and I think where people really connect with it is where it just seems like you're kind of eavesdropping on a conversation between friends who've never met each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And that can lead to spontaneity and creativity. I often say that, I believe that creativity is enhanced when you have multiple people collaborating with each other. And a podcast is just a kind of a beautiful combination of all of those things. And then, you focus on quality, you focus on brand. I think it's a really special relationship that you grow with your audience and customers.
Yeah, and that's why I think people out there, if you're going to get into podcasting, I think there's some fundamentals here that you need to ask yourself. Number one, why do you want to get into podcasting? What's it going to do for you? And then what kind of format are you going to have for your podcast? And are you going to be comfortable? Like we just said, are you going to be comfortable in this environment? Because to be honest, there's nothing worse than a podcast when it is kind of very staccato and it's very like structured, or when you see an interview where they've asked like 5 questions and got like 1 sentence answers and the whole thing is kind of sort of petering out a bit.
Absolutely. I think there's one other component that you didn't mention, John, but I know it's important to you because we talked about it before we hit the record button.
Mm-hmm.
That's just thinking of the audience. That's another, like, who am I speaking to? Why does this matter? I think a lot of podcasters that we see, and I get it, it's easy to fall into this, but they try to optimize for them or for their guests because, we want to make things easy and accommodate and stuff like that. But what are you doing for the listener, and how much are you thinking about the listener? Because ultimately that's what we're doing this all for. And the example that you mentioned, like, you're asking a lot for a listener to spend 30 minutes to an hour listening to something like that and then come back for more. I think it's a big ask unless you're really doing something unique and different.
Yeah, and that's why I think that it's good advice too for podcasters. There's a temptation to, when you get into it, is to go for the standard kind of people, like the same kind of group of people that's in your industry, and talk to them like everybody else talks to them, and that's fine. And I'm not knocking that. That's obviously their standards for a reason. But I think if you want to stand out, I think you got to branch out a little bit and be a little bit more creative in the kind of guests that you invite. It'll be hit or miss sometimes, but I'm telling you, when it's a hit, it really kind of establishes you as when people sit up and go, man, that was interesting. That was an interesting person.
Yeah, listeners really listen to whole categories of shows within podcasts. So it's pretty easy to see, oh, this is a person that I've listened to, and on another show and that sort of thing. So I think, by all means, interview those people. They're interesting for a reason. They're experts, like all of those reasons. They lend credibility to your show. But I think really, asking unique questions, like there's always different directions that we can take a conversation. What makes your show unique may be the guests, depending on who you are. Our advisor Jordan Harbinger is able to get access to guests that I would say make his show unique, like Kobe Bryant or something like that is really really kind of a crazy level of guest. But even in that, right, Jordan knew that Kobe had been interviewed thousands of times, so
Mm-hmm.
do your research, figure out what other questions have been kind of asked over and over again, and then find the negative space, find the gaps in between there, and really look for the interesting stories that your listeners haven't heard before. That's what's really going to, that plus your personality is what's going to set your show apart from the next in your category, as well as quality and production value and branding, which is really the whole package when it comes to a podcast.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with you, and I think that that's a very critical point for people to take away is, as you said, it's fine to interview people who've been interviewed by a lot of other people. Chances are they have been, but
They're
uh,
pros. Yeah.
they're pros, yeah. But find unique questions, and I had to be honest, I interviewed somebody recently, and they told me at the end of it that they had never been asked those questions ever
That's
before
the
in their interview.
best.
Isn't that a great
And
feeling?
yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And what's even nicer, she said, and you didn't ask me any of the questions that I normally get asked.
That's a
And
great
I thought,
compliment.
no, it is. And I just think that's a great takeaway for people is, yeah, don't fall into the trap of asking the same old questions. Go do, as you said, do some research, look for that negative space. And that's a great way to establish like unique, valuable content.
Yeah, and then beyond that, it's really building out the habit of
Mhm.
podcasting rewards consistency, and we often talk about it like similar to a startup or an investment of some kind, where it rewards compound interest. It rewards the long game. So
Yeah.
you know your second, third, fourth week of podcasting aren't going to be all that amazing or exciting unless you really tapped into something unique, which has happened before a few times. So by all means, try, shoot for that. But I think that hasn't really been figured out quite yet. But what has is the audience growth that comes from consistently publishing on a regular basis, always looking to optimize for your audience and what they're listening to. Like, I think a good metric to go off of is like, if you're kind of bored in a conversation, chances are your audience isn't really going to resonate much more than you.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty good barometer. And I personally always try to walk away from every interview thinking, man, like I think that was the best interview we've done for our show between two mics. And also defining success. I think that's how I define success. But there's all types of ways to succeed within podcasting. It's not all silver and gold. It's not all monetization. There are tremendous social currency that comes from doing these interviews, building up relationships over the long term, building up credibility. There's all sorts of non-monetary value. So just to decide up front, what are you doing this for, and what's your metric going to be, and that's a really healthy way to build a podcasting habit.
Yeah, and I think again, I just want to underline a couple of those points for people out there is that, yeah, just like everything else, you can start your podcast tomorrow. And as you say, once in a blue moon, somebody has an overnight sensation hit. Yeah, but that's one in a billion. Mostly you got to build it up, and it's going to take time, and you just got to be patient and realize it take time. How many times in the past have we seen people start blogs and it's, hi, I'm going to be bringing you content. I'm going to be posting 3 times a week, great content. And then you see that was written 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or whatever. And they'd obviously just given up after a few weeks. I mean, it's the same thing here. You're not going to suddenly get fantastic viewer or listenership overnight. So the consistency is very important. Just the sticking at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can use those reps in the beginning to really improve and make changes. I think people oftentimes design their show up front, and then that can feel a little bit rigid. So switch it up. Ask your audience. Once you have some people listening, that's a really great way to optimize your show for them, is just to ask, what did you like? What didn't you like? Introduce some new segments. Keep switching it up and double down on what works.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get better with practice, just like everything else in life. The more you do it, the better you get if you're prepared to learn as you go. So what has just let me ask you a couple of final questions. What has surprised you about the type of people maybe who've come to you to use your service? Were you surprised but that you got some maybe very different types of people you weren't expecting?
Well, podcasters come from all walks of life, right? Like oftentimes what makes podcasters so interesting and unique is they're bringing some type of expertise and skill set that's not podcasting related, but they use the podcast medium to share it. For me, I think it's not a surprise anymore, but it was a first surprise when we first started engaging with podcast creators, because I've always been, I shouldn't say always because podcasting hasn't always been around, but I've been a fan of podcasting as a listener for quite a long time now, but never been on the other side as a creator. So we went to Podcast Movement in 2017, and that was like our first experience really getting exposed to the podcast community. And I had to keep my jaw up because every time I was talking with a new podcaster, the shows that they were working on were just blew my mind. I mean, and the reasons why they were doing them and who they were speaking to. For instance, there's a gentleman by the name of Glenn the Geek who's built the Horse Radio Network, and it's an entire podcast network all about horses. There's like one about horse carriages, horse riding, all different kinds of niches within that niche. And it just is mind blowing. Another gentleman who owns a mortuarium used his podcast as counseling those that are going through loss of a loved one and stuff like that. And it's just like, holy cow. Like I didn't realize that the medium of podcasting went so deep. I knew that it was a very niche focused medium, but I did not know how deep those niches would go. So that was surprising and continues to be, quite honestly, sometimes.
Yeah. And I think as well, what you've outlined there is I think also sometimes people think you have to be a top level expert in a field or whatever to have there's a fantastic podcast that I listen to and watch sometimes out of the UK, and it's done by former professional soccer players. However, these weren't top players. These were guys who played at lower level teams, were never like the stars in their teams or whatever. And they do this podcast where they invite other guys on who, you know, you would recognize the names, but they weren't top players like superstars, whatever. They were kind of bread and butter players. And the conversation and to find out about their lives and, you know, their careers and everything is absolutely fascinating. So I always use that as a good example. Is you don't have to be top of your field. You don't have to be the most, you have something, if you have experiences and you've got something interesting to offer, you just have to kind of reflect and think, yeah, you know, I do have some good experiences and there are people like me out there who might be interested in this.
That was the piece I was going to add. And I love that point that you both made. And is that these are niches, like these are very specific things that seem personalized. Like it probably feels like there's like one or two people out there who you're talking to, but it's also distributed. Distribution is built into podcasting over the web. So you're talking to anybody in the world who's interested in that very specific topic. And the math is pretty clear that those are really big communities. Even if it is something that's like incredibly specific, they're still able to find their audience. And that's one of the beautiful pieces that I love about podcasting.
Yeah, listen, fantastic. And it's a great note to end on. So all of the information about Squadcast and Zach and Rock will be below this video. But before we go, please do tell people a little bit more about yourself and Squadcast.
Yeah, well, if you're interested in starting a podcast, or your professional podcast is mostly who we work with, podcasters, I should say, check it out at squadcast.fm. We're happy to help you wherever you're at in your podcast journey, either get started or increase the quality, really resonate with your audience. We're going to be adding video recording very soon here in the month of December. So that's really, really exciting to us. And we're really, looking forward to helping you with your show. It sounds great.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, listen, both of you, thank you very much for this. I'm sure people found this very interesting. I look forward to hearing from anybody who gets into podcasting. Check out Squadcast, squadcast.fm. My name is John Golden, SalesPOP Online, Sales Magazine, Pipeliner, CRM. See you all again soon.